Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly, but not too quietly, into a time of corsets, crinoline, and Christmas chaos. Tonight's adventure, what it was really like being a naughty girl during Victorian Christmas. Yes, not a princess, not a Dickensian angel, but the scandalously mischievous kind. The ones who didn't always sit with ankles crossed or keep their bonnets tied. Before we begin, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy this blend of sleep, history, and absurdity. Drop a comment telling me what year you wish you'd cause a scandal in, or just what snack you're currently sneaking after midnight. Trust me, Victorian parents would disapprove of both. Now, dim those lamps, or, flick off the LED bulbs, fire up your fan for that perfect white noise, and get comfortable. If you've got a blanket, wrap it tighter than a Victorian moralist clutching her pearls at the sight of an uncovered ankle. Let's be honest. Have you ever wondered what actually happened to the naughty girls during Christmas in the age of Queen Victoria? Did Santa bring them coal? Or did they get a strongly worded letter from their local vicar? Were they secretly running wild under those 10 layers of petticoats? Or just hiding in the pantry with an extra slice of Christmas pudding? How naughty did you have to be before you found yourself on the wrong end of a carol? And what even counted as naughty when everyone was expected to be so proper you'd get a scolding for humming jingle bells off-key? Would you last a day resisting temptation? Or would you be banished to the attic after your first snarky remark about the Christmas goose? And is it true that the most rebellious girls simply started their own underground snowball fight leagues? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1852, in a drafty, over-decorated Victorian house, where the walls smell faintly of pine, paraffin, and family secrets. The hollies float, hung, the fires crackling, and you, yes, you, are officially on the naughty list. Good luck. The sun slices through heavy curtains, dragging you from sleep into another day of respectable family chaos. Your first thought, did anyone find out about the plum pudding incident? The house is suspiciously quiet, save for the distant sound of carolers already starting their rounds. Your stocking feels suspiciously heavier, possibly with coal. Or, worse, a note. Let's talk about Victorian guilt. The kind that seeps in before you even manage to open your eyes. You're lying in a bed that's less cozy winter haven and more Victorian sleep trap, shivering under layers of itchy blankets and blankets' relatives. Moth-eaten shawls, a drafty eiderdown, and something that might once have been a respectable quilt. You wiggle your toes, marveling that none have frozen off. You try to stretch, but the weight of so many covers and questionable decisions presses you flat. Around you, the house breathes and creaks. Down the hall, someone is already stoking the fire. And, you hope, not muttering about missing pudding portions or the case of the disappearing marzipan pig. You listen, searching for clues. Is there a heightened level of maternal sighing coming from the kitchen? Is father stomping around in his slippers, muttering about respectable behavior? These are the sound cues that tell you if you've been found out. You gingerly reach for your stocking, tacked to the bedpost, of course, in case Santa needs to leave you evidence. It's heavy. Dread pools in your stomach as you tip out the contents. There it is, a chunk of coal, black as your recent deeds, and a folded bit of paper. The Victorian version of a cease and desist letter, written in your mother's slanting script. Dearest, we shall discuss your behavior after breakfast. Not if, not maybe. Just the cold, hard promise of consequences, wrapped up in a loving salutation. You stare at the coal for a moment. It's surprisingly dense, physically and metaphorically. In the Victorian imagination, coal was more than a fuel source. It was a moral reckoning, Naughty children received coal, and not the artisanal, decorative kind you see at hipster markets. No, this is the dusty, smudgy, possibly stolen from the scullery variety, ready to stain your hands and your conscience. You could protest. You could blame the cat. You try to gaslight the entire household. What pudding? I've been here the whole time, perfecting my embroidery. But deep down, the Great Plum Pudding heist of 1852 was not as secret as you hoped. There's a thump in the hall. Siblings. Innocent? Maybe. Or maybe they're just less experienced at hiding evidence. You pull the covers up to your chin and consider your options. Do you face the day with contrition, or double down on the unjustly accused routine? The Victorian morning is not forgiving. The air in the room is cold enough to keep your cheeks red, and the knowledge that you'll have to appear in the kitchen for breakfast, facing an entire tribunal of relatives, makes you wish for invisibility, or, at the very least, a time machine and a solid alibi. You trudge across the cold floor, stocking in hand. Downstairs the house is already humming. The fire crackles in the parlor. The smell of weak tea and burned toast drifts from the kitchen, and the sound of carolers outside mingles with the raised voices of your siblings, loudly discussing who is the real criminal in the household. You catch your mother's eye. She raises an eyebrow, then glances at your hand, where the coal is still leaving little sooty fingerprints. She says nothing, yet the weight of your stocking is now matched by the weight of expectation. The Victorians were masters of both subtle and not so subtle discipline. Breakfast will not be a simple meal. It will be a test, a performance, a chance for everyone to drop gentle, not at all subtle hints about the value of honesty, restraint, and the tragic fate of those who cross the line. Even the dog looks at you suspiciously. Still, as you sip your tea lukewarm as penance, there's a flicker of pride. You made it another year without being boring, and in a house where the highest virtue is being seen and not heard, there's something almost heroic in being the one to give them a story to tell. So you wipe the soot off your hands, square your shoulders, and prepare for breakfast, ready to face the consequences, or at least try to swap your coal for a leftover orange when no one is looking. Welcome to Christmas morning, Victorian style. Half tradition, half tribunal, all drama. And you're right at the center of it. Victorian naughtiness wasn't just about stealing sweets. No, the bar was low. Talked back to Aunt Millicent? That's a mark. Sneezed during prayers? Mark. Didn't curtsy deeply enough to Mrs. Hatherley from next door? Oh, you're practically a criminal now. Let's get one thing straight. The Victorian naughty list was not a list you got on by accident. It was a list you were already on by default. This was an age obsessed with rules, rituals, and keeping up appearances, and for girls, that meant you were almost certainly guilty of something before you even rolled out of bed. In fact, you could commit at least 3 social felonies before breakfast just by existing too enthusiastically. Every moment of your day, someone, mother, governess, the lady from 2 streets over with the binoculars, was watching for infractions. It was like living in a never-ending episode of Downton Abbey if all the footmen were secretly informants. The standards for naughtiness were so strict. It's a wonder there was any room on the list for Santa to write anyone else's name. What did it take to earn your place? It could be as minor as a sigh during embroidery practice. Or, heaven forbid, expressing an opinion about anything. Did you say you preferred the green ribbon to the blue one? Mark. Did you forget to thank the cook with exactly the right tone of humility for serving boiled cabbage 3 nights in a row. That's a mark and a half. In fact, if you weren't careful, you could rack up so many marks in a single afternoon, you'd be lucky not to be sent to your room with a copy of Moral Tales for Young Ladies as punishment. Let's not forget the crimes of hygiene. Were your shoes slightly muddy after a walk in the garden? Mark. Was your hair escaping from its plait, making you look more wild orphan than model of domestic virtue? Mark. Did you, in a moment of weakness, forget to cover your mouth while laughing out loud at one of father's long stories about his boarding school days? Double mark. You didn't need to be a villain. You just had to be alive, under 12, and blessed with a pulse and a sense of humor. And the infractions got weirder. There were the ancient family rules, each more arbitrary than the last. Don't run in the hallway unless a relative you've never met before is visiting, in which case you must run, but only to fetch slippers. Don't speak during supper unless you're asked a question, at which point you must answer briefly, clearly, with a slight smile and, ideally, a quote from the Bible or Tennyson. Never yawn, never frown, never, ever mention bodily functions of any kind, even if the dog is throwing up under the Christmas tree. But the real trap? The standards moved. One day, smiling at the vicar is friendly and becoming. The next, it's forward and improper. You could be punished for not singing loudly enough during family caroling, or, if you sang too loudly, for drawing undue attention. If you excelled at parlor games, you were unladylike competitive. If you lost, you were a poor sport. In short, you could never win, but you could always be naughty. Of course, every family had its own favorite additions to the list. Aunt Millicent's main obsession was elbows. Yours must never be seen, never rest on the table, and never, ever point directly at a relative. Mrs. Hatherley, the next-door neighbor, insisted that a proper girl must always walk with her toes pointing slightly outward and her eyes modestly cast downward, but not so downward that you looked suspicious. You'd think these people were secretly writing a Victorian sequel to Minority Report, where the crime was existing slightly out of step with the latest issue of Good Manners Monthly. All this meant the naughty list was more of a lifestyle than a punishment. And honestly, if you never made it onto the list, you were probably either a ghost or the family's least favorite armchair, so you did your best, knowing that sooner or later you'd sneeze, trip, giggle, or speak out of turn and find your name right back at the top, just where all the interesting people were. Because in the end, a Victorian Christmas without a little naughtiness was just another cold day in December. And where's the fun in that? The breakfast table is an arena, not a sanctuary. One raised eyebrow from your mother is all it takes to recall every slightly improper thing you did last night. From snickering at the curate's beard to hiding the family's prized mince pie under your pillow. It's early, but not too early for judgment. The room is bright with weak winter sunlight and the even brighter glare of parental disappointment. You take your seat among the assembled family, your back as straight as Victorian furniture, and your smile as tight as your laced boots. No one actually says anything, not at first. In Victorian households, silence is its own form of psychological warfare. Your father clears his throat ominously behind the newspaper. Your siblings angle for maximum distance, in case guilt is contagious. And you try to pretend your cup of tea is fascinating enough to stare at for the next 40 minutes. Breakfast is laid out in orderly rows. Dry toast, runny eggs, stewed prunes, and an unidentifiable greyish mush that, for some reason, keeps showing up every morning no matter how many times you beg for mercy. The tablecloth is so starched it could stand up by itself, and the family silver gleams, mostly because you were sentenced to polish it last week after the infamous unsanctioned parlour dance incident. There's a kind of choreography to the meal. Spoons clink. Butter is passed, but not too quickly, lest anyone suspect enthusiasm. Someone coughs in that special Victorian way that says, "I'm not mad, just very, very disappointed." You brace yourself for the opening volley. It always comes, sometimes disguised as concern. "Did everyone sleep well?" Translation: "I heard mysterious giggling after midnight." Or, "The mince pie seems to have migrated from the sideboard. I do hope it didn't get lonely." You resist the urge to look guilty, which of course makes you look absolutely, devastatingly guilty. You try to blend in. You mimic your eldest sister, who is universally believed to be incapable of sin. She cuts her toast into exact triangles, never speaks above a whisper, and somehow manages to eat stewed prunes without making a face. You try to follow suit, but halfway through, you jab yourself in the cheek with a fork and make an involuntary squeak. Instantly, all eyes are on you. It's a silent interrogation. The Victorians were masters of it. A mother's sigh could indict you for crimes stretching back to the last leap year. Your father might lower the newspaper just enough to glare over the rim, the Victorian equivalent of cross-examination. Younger siblings, traitorous imps, may whisper hints about someone who was last seen near the sideboard at midnight. Even the family dog stares at you with the world-weary eyes of a soul who has seen too many mince pies vanish in mysterious circumstances. And so you endure. You nod at the appropriate moments. You murmur apologies for small things you may or may not have done. You pass the marmalade, the toast rack, the social shame, each moving in a stately progression down the table. Every crumb is a test. Will you fidget? Will you let slip a secret smile? The stakes are high. Fail the test, and you're in for a morning of passive-aggressive comments and a special reading from Virtue Rewarded after breakfast. The worst part is knowing you're not alone. Across the table, your brother is trying desperately to look innocent, a feat undermined by the telltale smudge of currant on his collar. Your youngest sister's face is frozen in an expression of forced piety, her mouth twitching every time anyone mentions the word pudding. The air is thick with unspoken accusations, and the occasional stray giggle quickly suppressed. Eventually, the meal winds down. You're not sure if you've survived or simply delayed the inevitable. The teapot is empty, the toast is gone, and the verdict is yet to be delivered. As you rise from the table, your mother catches your eye and delivers the final fatal blow. "We'll talk later." It's not a threat, it's a promise. You're left with a stomach full of stewed prunes, a mind swirling with guilt, and the realization that, in the Victorian household, breakfast is less about nourishment and more about moral accounting. You make your escape to the relative safety of the hallway, only slightly traumatized and already plotting your defense for the trial to come. Because in this house, the breakfast table isn't just where the day begins, it's where reputations are forged, broken, and, if you're clever, rebuilt with a very straight back and a perfectly innocent smile. Dressing for the day means squeezing yourself into more petticoats than any child could ever need. Each one a reminder that freedom and movement is for the pure of heart. You swear your corset tightens itself every time you recall that prank with the nutcracker. Let's take a moment to appreciate the true villain of the Victorian Christmas: the clothing. Getting dressed isn't just a morning task, it's a physical and moral ordeal. Your day begins with a layer of chemise, soft only if you're lucky enough to avoid last year's laundry mishaps. Over that, there's the first petticoat, then another, until you start to suspect the family is hiding extra ones in your wardrobe as a test of your obedience or upper body strength. By the time you're halfway dressed, you're already out of breath and have developed an existential awareness of seams. And then, the corset. It hangs from your bedpost like a menacing question. How much mischief can you really get up to when you're laced in tight enough to see your own heartbeat? With each pull of the laces, your misadventures from the night before flash before your eyes. Did you or did you not swap the sugar for salt at last night's supper? If you admit it now, will they loosen the corset a notch as a reward for honesty? Spoiler, they will not. The layers only multiply from there. Stockings, garters, drawers, which, if you're very unlucky, are made from wool and guaranteed to itch in places no child should ever itch. And then your dress, buttoned, tied, and pinned into place by whichever relative is most invested in ensuring you can neither run nor breathe. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the mirror, a vision of Christmas spirit, swaddled in velvet and lace, but with the haunted eyes of someone who knows she'll never make it up the stairs at a full sprint again. Now let's talk about the movement, or the lack thereof. Victorian attire is designed for sitting very still and thinking pure thoughts. Naughty thoughts, rebellious ideas, or any hint of athletic ambition are stifled by your own wardrobe. Dropped a handkerchief? Good luck bending down to retrieve it. You might never return. Need to run from an angry sibling, a scandalized aunt, or a misdirected Christmas pudding. You'll be lucky to shuffle out of the room before the scandal catches up to you. Then there are the finishing touches. You're forced to endure hair ribbons that pull too tight, mittens attached to your wrists by complicated button contraptions, and a bonnet tied so securely you'd need a team of Victorian engineers to remove it. The outfit is finished with a sash tied so tightly it feels like a warning, a sprig of holly pinned to your shoulder, which will inevitably poke you at every inopportune moment. And, for formal occasions, a dainty reticule that could hold maybe 2 currants and a single crumpled secret note. Even the festive colours are suspect. Scarlet, lovely but dangerously close to being called brazen. White, acceptable, but only if you can keep it spotless, which, considering the state of Victorian Christmas pudding, is a fantasy best left to the pure of heart. Green, only if it doesn't clash with your complexion or your moral character. Your mother does the final inspection, turning you in slow circles, checking for stray threads or attitude. Each adjustment comes with a gentle reminder of how a proper girl sits, stands, and never ever runs, shouts, or breaks into spontaneous snowball fights. Meanwhile, your rebellious instincts simmer quietly beneath the layers, plotting their next move. By the time you finally descend to the parlor, you've aged 5 years, lost feeling in both feet, and developed a whole new respect for those medieval peasants who just wore sacks and called it a day. And as you settle into the sofa, moving as little as possible for fear of dislodging some vital component, you realize the ultimate irony. Christmas attire is less about looking festive and more about ensuring you survive until lunch without scandal, stains, or a full-blown wardrobe rebellion. Yet, as uncomfortable as you are, you know you're not alone. Across the room, your cousin is trying to wink at you but can't tilt her head far enough with her bonnet on. Your brother, meanwhile, is getting stuck in his own jacket, caught mid-squirm by your mother's eagle eye. There's comfort in numbers, especially when you're all wrapped up tighter than the Christmas crackers. So you take a deep breath, as deep as the corset allows, smooth your petticoats, and prepare to face a day of Victorian festivities, knowing that true Christmas spirit is measured not by your manners, but by how well you can outwit your own wardrobe. Victorian etiquette was an extreme sport. The rules: don't speak unless spoken to, don't laugh too loudly, Don't exist in a way that embarrasses the family. And above all, never, ever, let your true personality slip out. Too bad you're already failing. Let's be honest. Surviving a single Victorian Christmas without committing a social misdemeanor was about as likely as finding a leftover mince pie on Boxing Day. For girls, the house was booby-trapped, with rules so complicated that simply drawing breath could be considered suspicious if done at the wrong decibel level. You might as well have been tiptoeing through a field of hidden mousetraps, each one rigged to snap shut with a gasp from Great Aunt Dorothea. Step 1. Watch your words. You're supposed to answer questions with just enough enthusiasm to show gratitude for being spoken to, but not so much that it looks like you enjoy attention. Got an opinion about the plum pudding? Keep it to yourself. Unless you can express it in a way that compliments the cook, the family, Queen Victoria, and possibly God, all in one breath. Even then, it's safer to nod politely and pray you don't get quizzed about your favorite parlor game. Hint: silent sitting is always a crowd pleaser. The real challenge is that no one tells you all the rules. Some you're expected to know by osmosis, inherited along with your mother's ability to look disappointed with a single glance. Did you curtsy correctly when the vicar arrived? Did you forget to thank Cousin Henry for the handkerchief he dropped on the floor and handed back to you with visible disgust? Did you, horrors, forget the correct fork for the preserved gooseberries? Each moment is an opportunity to mess up, and if you do, you can be sure it will be remembered and recounted for the next 5 Christmases. It isn't just what you say, it's how you move, stand, and even breathe. Sitting properly means knees together, hands folded, and a serene expression that says you're contemplating the majesty of the Christmas season and not, as is more likely, wondering if anyone will notice if you sneak a second helping of pudding. Fidgeting is strictly forbidden, as is tapping your foot, humming, or glancing longingly at the snowball fight happening outside. You must be a statue, a cheerful, breathing, but extremely still statue. And let's not forget about laughter. Laughing was allowed, in theory, but only at designated times and never, ever at the expense of the family's dignity. Did you giggle when Uncle Percival's toupee slipped during grace? That's an etiquette red card, and a guaranteed one-way ticket to the naughty list. Even worse, snorting, chortling, or, heaven help you, emitting any sound that might be described as unladylike. The minefield extends to every room in the house. Entering the drawing room, don't step on the rug's edge, don't let your skirt brush the piano, and for the love of all things proper, don't trip over the dog. If you do, apologize to the dog, the rug, and every ancestor whose portrait hangs in the hallway. Reaching for the plum cake? Wait until it's offered, twice. Decline politely once, oh, I couldn't possibly. Then accept on the second offer, as is custom. Accept too soon, and you're greedy. Refuse twice, and you're ungrateful. Yes, the entire meal is essentially a Victorian improv exercise. Of course, the worst part, the relatives, living reminders that someone is always watching. The family matriarch sits at the head of the table. Her stare, so sharp it could slice a Christmas ham. The cousins exchange smug glances, silently daring you to commit some minor faux pas so they can tell the story later. The neighbor's daughter, perfect in every way, is there too, providing a walking, talking example of how it's done. You, meanwhile, are just hoping not to drop your spoon. Even escaping outside brings no relief. In the garden, you're supposed to walk with your hands demurely clasped, your gaze fixed somewhere in the middle distance, as if you're perpetually searching for meaning in the fog. Running, shouting, or playing with the boys is a quick way to end up resting indoors for the rest of the festivities. So you do your best to survive, ducking and weaving through the invisible wires of expectation. A small misstep here, a slightly too loud chuckle there, Soon your record is as blemished as the tablecloth after Christmas pudding. And you know what? Sometimes, in those tiny moments between disasters, you manage a real smile. Because being yourself, even for half a second, is the greatest rebellion of all in the etiquette minefield. And honestly, it's the only thing you'll remember fondly when the year turns and the rules begin all over again. The only thing better than a stolen sugar cube is the thrill of not getting caught. You keep an eye on the marmalade while eyeing the forbidden brandy in the pudding, both equally out of reach technically. Victorian breakfasts were supposed to be all about decorum, moderation, and moral fibre. Literally, given the amount of boiled oats and dry toast on the table. But for the enterprise naughty girl, they were also about stealth and sweet-talking your way into a better start to the day. The rules say no sweets before midday and no brandy, until you're at least old enough to legally own a parasol. Naturally, those are the first rules you consider breaking. It starts small. The sugar bowl is strategically placed at the far end of the table, guarded by your eldest sister, the self-appointed sugar police, while you're trapped in a minefield of stewed prunes and unsalted porridge. But you're patient. You wait for that perfect moment. Maybe when someone is distracted by the dog barking at a passing caroller, or when your mother launches into another speech about the dangers of modern pastries. With the finesse of a cat burglar and the nerve of a seasoned criminal, you nudge the bowl ever so slightly closer with your spoon. Just a quick dip, 1, 2 cubes, straight into your tea, and, if you're feeling truly daring, one slipped under the table for later. The marmalade is another battlefield. Technically, it's meant for father's toast, and you're meant to be content with a whisper of butter, if there's any left. But you've mastered the art of accidental spillage. A strategic elbow here, a soft oops there, and suddenly you have a small pool of citrusy gold for yourself. Of course, if you're caught, you'll have to withstand a lecture on self-control and the collapse of society that began, apparently, with people eating orange preserves before 8 a.m. Let's talk about the real holy grail, brandy. The Christmas pudding sits on the sideboard, soaking in forbidden riches and topped with enough alcohol to drop a Victorian aunt. As a proper child, you're supposed to pretend you don't even know what brandy is, despite the fact that you can smell it from across the room and watched your uncle pour it, liberally, over the pudding last night. Still, there's always hope. Maybe you'll manage a quick swipe of pudding when backs are turned, or a taste test justified by the need to make sure it isn't poisoned by rival families. A perfectly reasonable concern, at least in your mind. Meanwhile, alliances form and break faster than you can say current bun. You're not the only one with a sweet tooth and rebellious streak. The cousin across the table is currently palming a sultana. Your brother, always 2 steps ahead, has hidden a lump of brown sugar in his shirt cuff. Your youngest sibling, bless her soul, is still at the innocently sticky fingers stage, yet to realize that true mischief requires deniability. But the game isn't just about what you manage to eat. It's about how well you hide it. You've perfected the innocent look, the art of feigning deep interest in father's long stories about the Napoleonic Wars while actually concealing a stolen bonbon in your napkin. You offer to help clear the plates, tucking a biscuit in your sleeve for emergency rations during the mid-morning lull. You and your fellow miscreants exchange knowing glances, an unspoken code of solidarity in the face of oat tyranny. And all the while, the adults keep watch. There's the ever-present threat of being caught red-handed, or worse, sticky-fingered. Your mother's eagle eyes sweep the table, looking for any sign of forbidden pleasure. If she suspects, she won't accuse you directly. No, She'll simply remark that those who cannot resist temptation at breakfast will surely meet with scandal by supper. The threat lingers, as does the taste of contraband marmalade, making victory all the sweeter. In the end, it's not the food that matters. It's the thrill, the game, the feeling that, for just a few stolen moments at the start of the day, you can outwit the rules and treat yourself to something deliciously off-limits. Victorian breakfasts may have been designed to build character, but you're pretty sure they mostly built better liars and nimbler fingers. And as you slip away from the table, a rogue sugar cube warming your palm, you know you've already won the day. One small, sweet rebellion at a time. You're not alone. In every grand house, there's a clandestine network of rebellious girls plotting mischief, rolling their eyes at propriety and devising elaborate codes for sneaking extra tarts from the kitchen. Victorian society might have prided itself on primness and discipline, but under every starched tablecloth beat the hearts of covert rule breakers, girls who saw the world not as a series of rules to be followed, but as a puzzle to be solved, usually with laughter, crumbs, and the occasional muddy boot. These were the girl gangs, unofficial, unrecorded, and utterly essential for surviving Christmas in a house where the carpet was more sacred than the family Bible. Initiation into this secret society didn't involve a handshake so much as a shared look, the one you exchange with your cousin after both of you accidentally knock over the same vase, or with your sister when you make eye contact across the parlor during another endless recitation of The Night Before Christmas. You just know. The truly gifted could communicate entire strategic plans via eyebrow alone. One quick glance. Distraction at 2 o'clock. 2 blinks. Mince pies in play. Their headquarters. The upstairs linen closet. The nook behind the grand staircase. Or any room with a door that could be quietly closed while Aunt Mildred napped. The supplies. Purloined sweets. A dog-eared copy of The Mysteries of Udolpho. Scraps of ribbon. And, of course, the all-important lookout. Usually the youngest, chosen for her innocent face and capacity for ear-piercing shrieks when an adult got too close. The first rule of the Naughty Mrs. Society: never leave evidence. If a tart vanished from the kitchen, it was essential to sprinkle just enough flour on the floor to create plausible deniability. Blame the cat, the cook, or a passing breeze. If a forbidden novel was found under your mattress, everyone in the gang would claim ownership at once, flooding the system with so many suspects that the real culprit could slip away while the grown-ups argued about the decline of youthful virtue. Strategy meetings happened in hushed tones during embroidery hour, supposedly focused on cross-stitch, but in reality plotting the logistics of a midnight pantry raid. Whispered codes were developed. The blue bonnet flies at midnight. Translation: cook's gone to bed. It's raining in the parlor. Translation: someone spilled something suspicious and needs backup. Fast. You'd be amazed how much espionage could be fit into a sentence about buttonholes. There were always older girls with legendary status, the ones who once managed to swap all the Christmas crackers for ones filled with pebbles, or orchestrated the great peppermint drop heist of 48. Their stories were passed down like ancient lore, inspiring younger generations to new heights of mischief. Did you hear about Clara, who snuck into the conservatory and replaced all the lilies with leeks? True or not, these tales gave every new recruit hope. But this was not just about sweets and hijinks. It was about solidarity. There's a particular relief in knowing that when you get caught tracking mud across the hall, someone else will step forward and say, "It was both of us." And if you're marched off for an afternoon of moral instruction with Great Aunt Drusilla, you know that a note, carefully folded and tucked in your pocket, will be waiting. Meet under the holly tree. I have biscuits. The girls' alliance was essential for survival. Adults, for all their wisdom, had a fatal flaw. They always underestimated just how organized the innocent children could be. While the grown-ups planned their sermons and schedules, the girls were plotting counter-offensives, redecorating the Christmas tree with absurd ornaments, or plotting the annual snowball ambush on unsuspecting brothers and suitors. By the end of Christmas week, when all the mince pies have been accounted for, or, more likely, have vanished mysteriously, you realize the best memories aren't the polite ones. They're the ones shared in giggles and conspiratorial whispers, covered in flour and sugar, sealed with a pinky promise that you'll never, ever confess, at least not until you're old enough to write your own etiquette book full of accidental loopholes. Because in the cold, chaotic, rule-bound world of a Victorian household, it's the secret societies of naughty misses who make everything warmer, brighter, and 1,000 times more fun. And if you ever need to find them, just follow the trail of crumbs and muffled laughter. A true connoisseur of mischief knows that the best pranks are never confessed. From lacing the wassail with a little too much nutmeg to hiding father's pipe, every prank is a potential headline in tomorrow's family gossip. Being a naughty girl at Christmas meant perfecting the delicate balance between innocent fun and high-stakes family drama. Victorian society might have been obsessed with order, but for every stern-faced aunt enforcing the rules, there was at least one girl, sometimes more, scheming behind the scenes, poised to make the season a little more memorable, or at least a little more chaotic. The real artistry was in subtlety. An expert prankster knew that big, flashy stunts were for amateurs. The classics, swapping the labels on the Christmas preserves, so unsuspecting uncles would find their toast unexpectedly spicy, or arranging the nativity scene so that the wise men mysteriously lost their crowns, only to have them turn up on the family dog by tea time. If you could manage a prank that resulted in both confusion and a respectable amount of laughter, without anyone quite sure who was responsible, you had achieved Victorian Christmas greatness. Wassail was a frequent target, partly because no one could resist a warm, spicy cup, and partly because there were so many ways to improve it. Was it really so bad to add an extra glug of brandy or a scandalous dusting of cayenne? The expressions on the faces of the elders after that first sip were, as they say, worth every risk. If caught, you perfected the wide-eyed look of "I would never," and immediately blamed the recipe, or possibly the French. Then there was the Christmas cracker subterfuge. A little extra snap, a swapped paper crown, a riddle rewritten so that it made no sense at all. Small, calculated touches that caused confusion and giggles all around the table. You'd claim innocence with your best angelic face, all while quietly taking notes for next year's escalation. Let's not forget the parlor games. Blind Man's Bluff offered the perfect cover for a little harmless mayhem, a well-placed cushion underfoot, a rearranged chair, or a mistaken tug at your brother's suspenders. The object was never to get anyone in real trouble, just to sow enough confusion that the adults started to suspect one another, creating a delicious tension that lasted long after the game was over. Of course, every house had its own legendary prankster. Maybe it was the cousin who managed to sneak a frog into the Christmas pudding mold, causing a shriek heard all the way to the next parish, or the sister who engineered a snowstorm in the drawing room with a few artfully ripped feather pillows. These stories were passed down year after year, with details exaggerated for effect, serving as both inspiration and a cautionary tale. The most ambitious girls aimed higher, timing a prank for the exact moment a stern uncle launched into his annual moralizing speech, or orchestrating a fake ghost sighting just as the grown-ups settled in for their evening sherry. Bonus points if you could keep a straight face while everyone else lost theirs. But pranking was not just about laughs. It was about cleverness, creativity, and, let's face it, survival. Life in a Victorian household was rigid, and Christmas, despite all the cheer, could be stifling for those with quick wits and restless energy. These small acts of rebellion were ways to claim a little space, a little fun, and a little notoriety in a world that wanted you to sit quietly and smile. Success was measured not by how many people you fooled, but by how many suspected to you and how well you played the innocent. The best pranks left no evidence, no confession, and only the faintest, most mischievous glimmer in your eye when someone asked, "Who could possibly have done this?" So, as the holly wilts and the candles burn low, remember this. Victorian Christmas wasn't just a time for carols and contemplation. It was, secretly, the season of the prank, where the best mischief was wrapped in ribbon, hidden in plain sight, and destined to become legend by next December. And you were always one step ahead, planning the next great scandal that would keep the family gossip mill grinding long into the new year. Victorian Christmas cards were weird. You know you're in trouble when your card features a dead robin and a cryptic message from Cousin Tabitha. May your days be as bright as your reputation is tarnished. For all their talk of propriety and good cheer, the Victorians excelled at sending messages that were just a little pointed. Christmas cards weren't simply a way to spread seasonal goodwill. They were the period's most creative delivery system for thinly veiled insults, social reminders, and the kind of passive aggression you'd expect from someone who's been waiting a year to say, "I told you so." The art of the Christmas card itself was a spectacle. Forget snowmen and smiling Santas. Victorian cards leaned heavily into the bizarre. There were frogs ice skating, turnips dancing, and, most distressingly, a seemingly endless parade of dead birds, looking as festive as a leftover Christmas ham. No one really knows why. Maybe it was symbolic. Maybe it was a cry for help. Or maybe someone's cousin worked at a taxidermy shop and got a discount. But the real game was in the message. A well-crafted Christmas card could convey everything from grudging forgiveness to "My dearest niece, may your manners improve with the season," to icy warning shots, wishing you a peaceful holiday and hoping your late-night escapades are finally behind you. Some were direct, some dripped with sugar, and others, like Cousin Tabitha's, cut sharper than an icicle falling off the eaves. This was the Victorian equivalent of subtweeting, but with glitter, ink, and absolutely no chance of an unsend button. You could always tell who was in trouble based on the card pile. If your envelope was thicker than usual, it meant you'd been especially memorable that year. Perhaps you'd borrowed and never returned a handkerchief, bested someone at charades, or, gasp, let a secret slip about who really ate the last slice of fruitcake. Your card was guaranteed to remind you. It wasn't just about who sent the card either. It was about where it was placed. Was it tucked lovingly among the pine boughs in the parlor, or set just slightly askew, half hidden behind the clock on the mantel, as if even the furniture had mixed feelings about your conduct? If a card disappeared entirely, you could assume a Cold War had just begun. Family, feuds that lasted generations, could be reignited with a single card. "A Merry Christmas to you and yours. May your geese be plumper than your stories," one cousin wrote, setting off a series of back-and-forth bird references that lasted until Easter. Sibling rivalry played out with competing cards. "May your holiday be as neat as your room finally." Even the family pets weren't safe. You'd get a card from the dog, obviously written by your brother, thanking you for sharing your roast beef under the table. Sometimes, the true sting came in what wasn't written. Best wishes was the most damning thing you could receive. So vague, so final, so devoid of warmth that you'd almost prefer the dead robin. Other times, the handwriting itself seemed loaded with judgment, each perfect loop and curl reminding you of your own hopeless penmanship. and the note you'd left for Santa, which is now circulating as a cautionary tale about spelling. The only thing to do was play along. You replied, in be kind, carefully crafting your own festive barbs. To my dearest cousin, may your mince pies be as sweet as your disposition, at least on odd-numbered days. The family card game was an ongoing exchange of sarcasm wrapped in tinsel, a sport at which only the most quick-witted and slightly ruthless could excel, and yet there was a twisted kind of comfort in it. Each card, no matter how pointed, was proof you were memorable, impossible to ignore, and maybe even a little bit loved, in that very Victorian, sideways sort of way. So you hung the dead robin with pride, smiled at the cryptic verses, and plotted next year's card, already planning the most elegant comeback ever crafted in gold leaf and snark. After all, in a world obsessed with manners, sometimes the only way to speak your mind was with a glittery, paper-thin jab, hand-delivered by the post, and preserved forever in the family album as evidence that, even in the age of utmost decorum, nobody could resist a little mischief. Santa was not the jolly guy you know. Victorian Father Christmas watched your every move, more like a seasonal informant than a magical gift-giver. Every giggle, every sideways glance could be reported straight to the top. Let's get something clear. Victorian Christmas was less heart's glow and more constant low-level panic. Santa, or Father Christmas, if you wanted to sound properly British, wasn't some benign, slightly overweight man in a fuzzy red suit. No. He was an all-seeing, possibly omnipresent entity with a network of snitches that included, but was not limited to, your siblings, the housemaid, your schoolmistress, and that neighbor who always seemed to be trimming her hedges whenever you did anything remotely fun. Victorian parents loved nothing more than weaponizing the legend of Father Christmas. He became an early version of Big Brother, complete with an ever-growing, invisible ledger where your naughties and niceties were meticulously tracked. You'd hear it all, season, careful Santa's watching. Or, more ominously, that's another mark for the naughty list. It didn't matter if you were just blowing off steam after your 15th embroidery lesson. If you so much as sighed too heavily near a family heirloom, it would surely be relayed up the chain of command, like Victorian espionage with a side of fruitcake. Every adult was in on it. The cook would mention that someone's fingers had been spotted near the Christmas cake. Father would ask pointed questions about who exactly broke the snow globe. The schoolmistress, in her impeccable script, wrote home to inform your parents about your lively enthusiasm for recitation. Code, of course, for won't stop reciting rude limericks. Each minor infraction was evidence, carefully catalogued for the big man's final judgment. And forget the idea of sitting on Santa's lap at the local department store. For Victorians, Santa was both everywhere and nowhere, more like a stern celestial accountant than a cuddle-ready holiday mascot. He lived in the fire, in the shadows, in the coal scuttle, and, if you believed your older siblings, underneath your very bed. There were endless stories, part cautionary tale, part ghost story, about children who lied, stole a fig, or talked back to Aunt Millicent, only to wake up on Christmas morning to a stocking full of coal and a lifetime of shame. The naughty list itself took on mythic proportions. It wasn't just a list, it was a dossier. Every misstep, every accidentally broken ornament, every loud laugh at the dinner table became a possible entry. You could almost hear the scratch of the quill as Father Christmas made his notes. Some kids believed he had a spyglass that could see through walls. Others were convinced he conducted nighttime patrols disguised as the family cat. Of course, the niece list was far more elusive. It demanded impossible standards, perfect posture, angelic patience, no less than 3 unsolicited compliments to elderly relatives per week, and an unwavering enthusiasm for boiled sprouts. And even if you managed to meet every single requirement, there was always the chance you'd be undone by a last-minute slip-up, a sneeze during grace, or a particularly spirited snowball fight gone wrong. The psychological warfare was impressive. You'd lie in bed, heart pounding, mentally reviewing every act from the past month, wondering which were forgivable and which were grounds for permanent naughty list status. You became hyper-vigilant, policing your siblings and sometimes even reporting them in hopes of improving your own standing. Martha put her elbows on the table again, just in case Santa wanted to know. And yet, there was a strange camaraderie in it. All the children lived under the same cloud of festive suspicion. You learned to pass secret notes, devise elaborate alibis, and cover for one another during interrogations. The thrill of outwitting the system, sneaking a sweet or sneaking a giggle, became its own Christmas tradition. Looking back, you realize Victorian Santa's surveillance didn't really make you better. It just made you better at sneaking, whispering, and occasionally genuinely wondering if the chimney really could talk. The gifts, when they came, were proof that either Santa had a short memory, or, more likely, that even the strictest surveillance can't keep a good, or slightly naughty, child down for long. So you'd hang your stocking with trembling hands, resolved to be perfect for the next 24 hours, and accept that, in the end, the naughty list was where the real fun happened anyway, because Victorian Santa might have been watching, but he also knew that the best Christmases were the ones with a little mischief in them. Sneaking into the pantry for a forbidden slice of cake is all fun and games until you knock over the silver, wake the dog, and face the ultimate consequence. Aunt Beatrice, in her nightcap, candle in hand, eyes squinting through suspicion. Victorian houses were not designed for stealth. Every floorboard creaked, every doorknob rattled, and the pantry door had a way of groaning just loudly enough to sound like a ghost, or, worse, like you. The air itself seemed to conspire against you, swirling dust motes in your candlelight as you tiptoed across freezing tiles in pursuit of the Holy Grail. A slice of leftover Christmas cake, a secret handful of candied ginger, or whatever treat had managed to survive the official festivities. The midnight feast was a tradition among naughty girls and their co-conspirators, a silent rebellion against a world that believed joy was best scheduled and strictly rationed. You'd lay awake, heart pounding, listening for the last of the adult footsteps to fade, for the house to settle into its familiar nighttime groans. Only then would you slip out from beneath suffocating blankets, navigating a sea of discarded slippers and abandoned dolls, hoping that tonight, you might actually succeed. The plan always started with precision. You and your accomplices, usually a cousin with a sweet tooth and nerves of steel, would rehearse every step. Avoid the creaky stair, hug the wall beneath the portrait of glowering ancestors, and for heaven's sake, don't step on the dog. And yet, just as success seemed inevitable, disaster would strike. Perhaps the silver serving tray you forgot to move clattered to the floor, echoing through the house like a warning bell. Maybe your candle sputtered at exactly the wrong moment, plunging you into darkness and confusion. Or the pantry door, usually so docile in the daylight, would choose this moment to get stuck, forcing you to jiggle the handle until the entire household might as well be ringing for breakfast. And then, the dog. Every family had one, a loyal, long-suffering beast who would sleep through thunder but leap to attention the moment a forbidden sausage casing hit the floor. His barking was a clarion call, and no matter how hard you shushed or bribed him with crusts, he could not be silenced. Soon the house was alive with movement, doors opening, feet shuffling, and the unmistakable sound of Aunt Beatrice shuffling down the hall in her housecoat, candle raised like a weapon, and squinting into the shadows for signs of villainy. Panic set in. You weighed your options, attempt a desperate escape, knocking over even more crockery in your haste, or simply freeze and hope to be mistaken for a coat rack. Your cousin whispered frantic instructions. Hide in the coal scuttle, pretend to be sleepwalking. Neither idea held much promise. At last, Aunt Beatrice appeared, the very embodiment of Victorian suspicion. Her nightcap was askew, her expression one of weary resignation. And what precisely is going on here? She would intone. The kind of rhetorical question that needed no answer. Because everyone already knew. The consequences, of course, were swift and theatrical. You might be marched back, to bed, sentenced to a breakfast of extra oats and moralizing, or, worst of all, subjected to a lecture on the dangers of indigestion, midnight air, and the fate of girls who wandered after dark. The adults would shake their heads and sigh, as if this were the very first time anyone in history had wanted a snack at midnight. When I was your age, Aunt Beatrice would begin, launching into a tale of deprivation so harrowing it could only have been invented for the occasion. Still, the failure was not entirely without reward. You and your accomplices would exchange glances in the darkness, stifling giggles. There was a strange satisfaction in knowing you had tried, that you'd conspired, and that, despite the setbacks, you'd found adventure in the most ordinary corners of the house. Sometimes, if you were lucky, your sibling would manage to smuggle a single crumb of fruitcake back under the covers. A tiny, illicit victory. And in the morning, as you sat at the breakfast table, eyes bleary, cheeks pink with embarrassment, you'd already be planning the next attempt. Because in a world of strict schedules and endless rules, even a failed midnight feast was better than never trying at all. And besides, Christmas comes every year, but the taste of rebellion, even when it ends in disaster, lingers longer than any fruitcake ever could. Receiving coal wasn't just a punishment, it was a warning shot across the bow of your social standing. Worse, the neighbors would always find out. Did you hear? The Treadwell girl got coal again this year. For the third time. In the grand hierarchy of Victorian Christmas gifts, coal wasn't even on the chart. While the good children unwrapped oranges, sweetmeats, and the occasional toy soldier or doll, the naughty found only a cold, sooty lump awaiting them in their stocking. An annual audit of their behavior, signed by Santa himself. Coal wasn't just black and dusty, it was symbolic. It was Victorian shorthand for society. Is disappointed in you. A kind of negative Yelp review from the North Pole. But let's be honest. Was it really that bad? To begin with, coal was everywhere. It powered the house, it heated the water, on those rare, luxurious bath days, and it fueled every train that brought fresh oranges and cousins to your door. On some level, coal was the real MVP of the Victorian era. The only problem was, you weren't supposed to want it. It was what kept the scullery maid busy and the underfoot boys smudged. For a child, especially a girl with a reputation to protect, coal wasn't just an object, it was a social statement. Receiving coal meant being marked. It was never a secret. The mere act of hanging your stocking was a public event, with siblings and staff eyeing each other knowingly as the lumps fell. Next came the subtle, or not so subtle, parade through the house. A cousin sniggering behind their mittens, a neighbour's glance lingering a little too long at your sooty fingers, the footman arching an eyebrow as he swept up the stray crumbs of Christmas shame from the hearth. The Treadwell girl got coal again, they'd whisper. Maybe she spoke out of turn, or maybe she broke the cheese dish. Or maybe, just maybe, she's living proof that Santa values personality over punctuality. The real problem wasn't the coal itself, it was the idea of coal. Victorian society thrived on moral symbolism. Coal was the one gift that suggested you needed to try harder next year, as if not eating the last mince pie or speaking without permission was a full-time job requiring an annual review. Every time you tripped over your petticoat or failed to memorize the correct blessing, you could almost feel another coal pebble being earmarked for your stocking. Of course, the situation was ripe for exaggeration. Siblings became coal informants, ready to tattle at the slightest hint of naughtiness. If you don't let me have the bigger slice, I'll tell Mother you put salt in the sugar bowl. Coal for sure. Christmas morning turned into a bizarre, high-stakes lottery where the true gift was avoiding infamy. Some took it in stride, even with a dash of pride. After all, coal meant you were memorable. The quiet, perfectly behaved children faded into the background, their oranges and marzipan soon forgotten. But the child with the coal? Legendary. She was the one with stories to tell. Of sneaking out for midnight snowball fights, of giggling during the bishop's grace, of rearranging the Christmas cards so the most sarcastic message faced the vicar. The coal recipients were the life of the after-dinner gossip, the source of both scandal and admiration. Yet there was always that pang when your hand closed on the lump in your stocking. Would this be the year you finally turned things around? Was it time to transform, caterpillar-like, into the model of virtue everyone expected? Or was it better to embrace your notoriety and keep life interesting? The threat of coal was on de verse, supposed to inspire improvement. But honestly, it often just inspired more creative mischief. In the end, the coal dilemma was less about the gift itself and more about what it meant to be naughty. Maybe it was a badge of shame, or maybe it was a badge of honor, depending on your point of view. After all, coal could be chucked into the fire, fueling another round of Christmas stories and laughter as everyone gathered close. The room filled with warmth and a touch of smoke. Reputation might be everything, but so is having a little fun. And nothing lights up a cold Victorian winter quite like the glow of a well-earned lump of coal. Victorians loved a scary story, especially if it involved a misbehaving girl getting her comeuppance from a haunted Christmas pudding or the ghost of a disapproving governess. You begin to suspect the tales were just early attempts at behavior control. By the time Christmas Eve rolled around, every child in the house knew the drill. Gather in the parlor, clutch your mug of weak cocoa, and prepare to have your wits thoroughly scared out of you by candlelight. While the adults pretended to be above it all, you noticed they rarely missed a story. Even grandfather, who claimed to have seen it all, sat up a little straighter when the tales began. The room would hush, the wind would rattle the panes, and suddenly every shadow looked just a little more suspicious. But here's the secret. Victorian ghost stories were not subtle. They were moral lessons in disguise, chilling parables wrapped in gloom and fog. The star was almost always a girl who'd strayed from the straight and narrow. Perhaps she'd stolen an extra tart, peeked at presents, or, gasp, rolled her eyes at Sunday school. Her punishment? A midnight haunting that made her promise to be good as gold for the next 12 months, or at least until breakfast. Take the classic tale of Matilda, the child who laughed during the vicar's prayer. That very night, her pudding rose up from the bowl, sprouted raisins for eyes, and chased her through the kitchen, leaving behind a trail of currants and existential regret. Or consider The Phantom of the Parlor, featuring the ghostly governess who returned every Christmas Eve to lecture naughty girls about posture and the proper folding of napkins. In some versions, she rapped their knuckles with a spectral ruler for extra emphasis. The message was clear. Behave, or you'd end up on the wrong side of the supernatural. For every prankster or pie thief, there was a vengeful spirit waiting in the wings, armed with chilling warnings and an endless supply of old-fashioned discipline. Victorian adults didn't need Santa to keep children in line. They had the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and, most terrifying of all, the ghost of misbehavior yet to come. It didn't help that the house itself was made for haunting. Every corridor seemed to groan at midnight. The flicker of candlelight made the wallpaper swirl in the corner of your eye. An unexplained draft could set the parlor curtains rustling like the skirts of a ghostly aunt. The effect was so convincing that even the bravest among you would leap into bed and bury yourself under 5 itchy blankets, just in case anything came looking for you after midnight. Sometimes the adults got in on the action. Uncles banged on pipes, older cousins snuck around with sheets over their heads, and mothers arranged for mysterious footprints to appear in the flour by the pantry door, just where the naughtiest child had been seen last. These hauntings were always revealed by morning, but for a few deliciously terrifying hours you believed completely, yet for all the warnings. The stories had a strange allure. There was something thrilling about hearing your faults transformed into ghostly legends. Every child secretly hoped to be the star of next year's tale, provided the haunting ended with a lesson learned and a biscuit as reward. You'd promise, hands shaking, to be good, but as soon as daylight returned, you'd be plotting your next adventure, already testing the boundaries between naughty and legendary. By the end of the season, you realized the truth. Victorian ghost stories weren't really about scaring you straight. They were about making mischief part of the family lore, giving everyone a story to tell when the nights grew long and the pudding grew cold. Maybe you learned a lesson, maybe you didn't. Either way, you got a good scare, a belly laugh, and another reason to keep your eyes peeled for the next great haunting, just in case that pudding really does sprout eyes. Proper young ladies sat inside and did needlework. You, however, are ankle-deep in slush, orchestrating an underground snowball fight and convincing the stable boy to time your sled race down Dead Man's Hill. The official rules of Victorian girlhood were clear. Keep your skirts clean, your ankles hidden, and your hands occupied with embroidery. The unofficial rules, passed down in giggles and winks between sisters and cousins, were very different. If the grown-ups thought you were quietly knitting by the window, you were probably already halfway out the door, boots unlaced and heart pounding with anticipation, because nothing beat the wild, illicit joy of winter mischief. It always started innocently enough. Perhaps you needed fresh air, or felt a chill, and were sent to fetch more firewood. What began as a short walk quickly turned into a covert rally. Word spread fast. Meet by the stables. Bring mittens and attitude. Within minutes, a ragtag band of girls would appear, some with shawls, some with hats askew, all determined to squeeze as much fun as possible out of the afternoon before anyone noticed you were missing from the parlor. The snowball fights were a thing of beauty and chaos. Forget the decorum of the drawing room. This was war. You quickly learned that petticoats, while oppressive indoors, made excellent armor against icy projectiles. Even the strictest cousin got a wicked gleam in her eye as she packed her first snowball, aiming squarely at the nearest enemy hiding behind the rosebush. Alliances were formed and broken in minutes. Betrayals were swift, retribution swifter. The shrieks of laughter, quickly muffled when a maid or governess strolled by, sounded dangerously close to actual happiness. But the highlight, the ultimate test of bravery and balance, was the sled race down Dead Man's Hill. The name was not an exaggeration, though it was probably coined by the boys, who knew better than to challenge a girl with something to prove. The slope was steep, the run long, and the potential for disaster significant. That didn't stop you. With the stable boy pressed into service as an official timekeeper and the family's ancient toboggan at the ready, you lined up with your fellow conspirators, nerves jangling. On the signal, You were off, skirts flying, hair escaping its ribbon, laughter trailing behind you like steam in the winter air. Every race ended in a tangle of limbs and screams, sometimes victorious, sometimes not. There were bumps, bruises, the occasional sprained wrist, and, if you were unlucky, a scolding so epic it would echo through the family for weeks. Why must you insist on behaving like a common gutter snipe? Your mother would wail, as if sledding was a gateway to complete social collapse. Still, it was worth it. No amount of needlework could match the thrill of outpacing your own dignity. These moments of unladylike chaos were more than just fun. They were a declaration that you were not in fact made of porcelain or moral instruction, that you could slide, tumble, and throw as well as anyone, and that you'd happily risk a wet skirt and cold toes for the chance to feel alive. Even the youngest and shyest were swept up in the excitement, emboldened by the group's reckless energy. Someone always kept lookout. Someone always brought extra mittens, and someone always had a story about last year's near miss. Proof that mischief was a family tradition. When the games ended, you'd stumble back inside, cheeks flushed, hair wild, and a trail of muddy footprints marking your return. The adults would cluck and fuss and order you straight to the fire, where you'd feign remorse while secretly basking in your accomplishments. Sled races and snowball fights weren't just a rebellion. They were the highlight of your winter. And every time you passed Dead Man's Hill, you'd grin, knowing you'd left more than footprints in the snow. You'd left proof that being unladylike was just another way to make history, one bruised ankle at a time. Victorian parents feared one thing: spontaneous joy. So when you and your friends decide to carol with improvised lyrics, it's a risk that could end with the local vicar knocking on your door. Again, on the surface, Christmas caroling was a wholesome pursuit. A band of well-dressed children singing "God Rest You Merry," gentlemen in polite harmony outside the neighbors' doors, collecting the occasional mince pie, and, if you were very lucky, a copper coin. It should have been the safest tradition in the book, but Victorian society, ever anxious about decorum, regarded unchecked enthusiasm with suspicion. Caroling for girls, especially those with a reputation for mischief, was a minefield of social peril, where one wrong note or cheeky rhyme could land you in more trouble than if you'd stolen the Christmas goose. You and your partners in crime knew this, of course, but the lure of the forbidden was irresistible. There was something deliciously rebellious about slipping out under the gaslight, scarves wrapped high, boots squeaking on the frosty pavement, and gathering just out of earshot of the parlor windows. You'd huddle together, giggling, passing around songbooks with modest edits penciled in the margins, lyrics that poked fun at the neighbors, the vicar's long sermons, or even, in one legendary year, the unfortunate incident involving father's wig and a gust of wind. The art of caroling, you learned, was not just about singing in tune. It was about stealth, strategy, and timing. You had to choose your audience carefully. Mrs. Hatherley from next door, with her eagle hearing and passion for propriety, was best avoided. Mr. Bramble, on the other hand, rewarded cheeky verses with a wink and an extra biscuit. The trick was to deliver your most daring verses just loud enough for the other children to hear, but never so loud as to attract unwanted adult attention. Unless, of course, you were feeling bold and wanted to see how much you could get away with. Improvised lyrics became a kind of underground currency. "We Wish You a Merry Christmas," and a shorter sermon too, was a perennial favorite, as was the infamous "Jingle Bells, Vicar Smells, Father Lost His Hat." Each line was met with stifled giggles and glances over your shoulder, half expecting a parent or the vicar himself to emerge from the gloom, ready to lecture you on the importance of reverence and the dangers of rowdiness. If you got caught, and, let's be honest, you usually did, there were consequences. The punishment often began with a stern talking to in the drawing room, delivered in tones so grave you'd think you'd insulted the Queen herself. Your parents would wring their hands over the family's good name, lamenting how one careless rhyme could undo generations of respectability. The local vicar, ever diplomatic, would gently suggest that perhaps next year the girls could stick to the classics. Meanwhile, you and your friends would exchange silent, gleeful glances, already planning next year's set list. But even with the threat of grounding or a holiday spent copying out verses from Pilgrim's Progress, you couldn't resist. Singing was freedom, a way to claim a little slice of Christmas for yourselves. Loud, silly, and gloriously unladylike. There was nothing quite like the rush of hitting a high note while dodging the glare of an outraged aunt, or watching the neighbors' faces twist in a blend of shock and amusement as you rhymed parson with parsnip. A stretch, but you made it work. In time, even the adults seemed to recognize the harmlessness of your rebellion. After all, what was Christmas without a little noise, a little laughter, and the lingering suspicion that the girls' choir was up to no good? The year you were actually invited to sing at the village hall, lyrics pre-approved, of course, felt like a hollow victory. There was far more thrill in sneaking out after supper, whispering your own verses, and dodging the vicar's lantern as it bobbed down the lane. So while the official record may claim that Victorian caroling was a model of restraint, the truth is far more fun. In between the pious harmonies and proper curtsies, you carved out a space for creativity, boldness, and a little bit of chaos, one improvised verse at a time. And if it got you grounded, well, at least you had a good story to sing about next year. Nothing is quite as thrilling as sneaking a copy of Jane Eyre or A Penny Dreadful from the locked library, then reading it under the covers by candlelight. You're pretty sure you can hear Queen Victoria skiing from 400 miles away. For the average Victorian girl, the home library was less a place of enlightenment and more a locked fortress, guarded by adults convinced that the right book could be the undoing of polite society. The classics, Pilgrim's Progress, moral tales, and an endless parade of sermons were there for the taking. But the good stuff, that was hidden on the high shelves, behind locked glass, or under the ever-watchful eyes of an aunt who seemed to materialize out of thin air the moment you so much as glanced at the spine of anything with a heroine who had opinions. But you and your allies were nothing if not resourceful. The quest for forbidden stories became a Christmas tradition all its own. You'd spend days casing the study, timing the comings and goings of parents and servants alike. Every family had a secret key, hidden in a tea caddy, or tied to a ribbon tucked deep in the sewing basket. With a little luck, a lot of patience, and perhaps the cooperation of a like-minded cousin, you could gain entry into the kingdom of unsanctioned literature. The haul was always worth the risk. Jane Eyre, with its wild landscapes and rebellious governesses, felt dangerous in your hands, a manifesto for girls who preferred thinking to needlepoint. Then there were the penny dreadfuls, lurid tales of highwaymen, haunted mansions, or plucky orphans outsmarting villains twice their size. One glimpse at a cover, and you knew you were in for trouble, adventure, and at least one sleepless night. Of course, reading in secret brought its own challenges. By daylight, you perfected the art of looking bored with moral essays while your mind raced ahead to the next chapter of forbidden excitement. After bedtime, you'd huddle under the blankets, candle carefully shielded from nosy sisters, and the ever-present threat of a house fire. The real danger wasn't from ghosts or villains, but from your own heartbeat pounding so loudly you were sure it could be heard through the walls. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind at the window, sounded suspiciously like an adult coming to confiscate your literary contraband. Discovery was always a possibility. The punishment for reading unsuitable material was legendary: extra chores, no dessert for a week, and, worst of all, a long lecture on the dangers of overstimulating the female imagination, as if a single chapter of The Woman in White could send you into fits of revolutionary thinking. Still, the risk was part of the thrill. You and your co-conspirators would trade books at secret rendezvous points, the linen cupboard, the potting shed, or, for the truly daring, right under the governess's nose. Sometimes the forbidden reading list wasn't even that scandalous. A magazine with illustrations of Parisian fashions, or a science book with a few too many diagrams, could be just as alluring as tales of pirates or runaway heiresses. The point wasn't just what you read, it was that you read it because you weren't supposed to. Every stolen page felt like a victory against the dreariness of etiquette and the suffocating certainty that good girls should stick to sermons and sewing. Looking back, you realize these moments of literary rebellion weren't just entertainment. They were training for the rest of your life. You learned to question, to seek out adventure, to value stories that didn't fit the mold. And, perhaps most importantly, you learned that sometimes breaking the rules was the only way to find out who you really were. So, as you tucked Jane Eyre safely back in its hiding place, blew out your candle, and fell asleep, dreaming of wild moors and even wilder girls, you knew you'd carry the thrill of forbidden reading long after Christmas ended. Whenever and wherever the next story called your name, a cracker gone wrong can upend an entire dinner. Was it an accident when your sister's paper crown burst into flames? You plead the fifth, but the family is not convinced. The Victorian Christmas cracker was a symbol of the season, glittery, loud, and, if placed in the wrong hands, an absolute weapon of social chaos. Originally invented by a confectioner hoping to add some theatrical flair to his bonbons, the cracker quickly became a staple of the holiday table. Each was filled with a miniature trinket, a terrible joke, a paper hat, and just enough gunpowder to make even the most stoic great-aunt jump. In respectable hands, crackers were meant to delight. In yours, however, they were a loaded invitation for mayhem. You eyed the neat row of crackers down the center of the table like a general surveying the battlefield. There was always an air of anticipation. Would the snap be satisfying or pitiful? Would the prize be glorious or a dud? You'd barely made it through grace before elbows started jostling and glances darted around the table. Every cousin calculating how best to maximize their odds of getting the coveted tin frog or wind-up acrobat. Of course, this was also the moment the true mischief-makers went to work. It started innocently enough. A gentle tug, a victorious pop, the scramble for the hidden prize. But the real fun began when the contents failed to behave. Paper hats crumpled into unrecognizable shapes. Jokes were so bad they bordered on threats to public decency. Why did the vicar refuse the pudding? He couldn't stand the current affairs. And then, disaster. The year your sister's crown ignited on the candle flame, you were suddenly the prime suspect. Sure, you'd been sitting next to her, and sure, your history with matches was colourful. But that didn't, you'd engineered the world's first Christmas headgear inferno, or did it? In Victorian society, a dinner mishap was never just a mishap. It was an event, a story destined to echo through family legend for decades. The blame game began instantly, conducted through a barrage of pointed coughs and arching eyebrows. The grown-ups launched into lectures on safety and the fragility of reputation. One moment you're lighting a cracker, the next you're the talk of the county. Young lady, even the servants seemed to pause, ears perked for scandalous details. The true mischief wasn't in what happened, but in the speculation about how it happened. Maybe someone had switched the contents. slipping in an extra pinch of powder, or swapping hats for slips of newspaper doused in lamp oil. Maybe the joke inside your cracker was a little too on the nose. Why did the crown catch fire? Because it wanted to burn brighter than your reputation. Your uncle would laugh, your aunt would look scandalized, and your siblings would eye you with new admiration. There were other, subtler ways to use crackers as weapons of reputation. You might have tampered with the lucky cracker, ensuring your least favorite cousin got the squeaky toy that never stopped squeaking, or fixed things so your nemesis ended up with a riddle no one could answer. If you were really clever, you'd rig 2 crackers to pop at once, sending a cascade of confetti over the family matriarch's soup. Of course, you played innocent throughout. The secret to survival was never to confess, never to gloat, and always to look shocked when disaster struck. Oh dear, however did that happen? In the Victorian household, innocence was an art form, perfected by years of practice and honed by a lifetime of dodging responsibility. But for all the trouble they caused, crackers brought everyone together. By the end of the meal, sides had been chosen, peace offerings in the form of toffee were exchanged, and laughter echoed long after the last snap. The dinner might have descended into chaos, but the memory of that flaming paper crown, of one brief moment where everything was absurd and out of control, became part of the family story. Because at Christmas, it wasn't just your reputation on the line. It was your ability to turn even disaster into delight, a skill every naughty Victorian girl learned to master, one cracker at a time. Christmas dinner prep is an event best observed from a safe distance. Unless you're busy relocating the brandy bottle, swapping the salt for sugar, or simply taste testing every dish until you're caught red-handed. The Victorian kitchen at Christmas was a place of organized chaos, a battleground where cooks, maids, and occasionally an ambitious aunt all wrestled for control of the stove. Aromas of roasting goose, caramelizing carrots, and spiced puddings swirled together in a heady fog that spelled one thing for a naughty girl: opportunity. The grown-ups may have imagined you banished to the drawing room, but you knew the real action, the kind that left a mark on history, happened within earshot of the pantry. You weren't alone, of course. The kitchen conspiracy was a family tradition, handed down from cousin to cousin, each new recruit adding a signature twist. The first rule: blend in. At any moment, you might be handed a potato peeler, or sentenced to stir the gravy for 20 mind-numbing minutes. This was your chance to slip a spoonful of custard when the cook's back was turned, or to accidentally drop a currant on the floor for the cat, and promptly pop 2 in your mouth. The real thrill, though, came from bigger jobs. Missions worthy of a criminal mastermind with a taste for treacle. Relocating the brandy was the ultimate heist. 1 minute, the bottle was ready for flaming the pudding. The next, it was nestled safely under the stairs, available only to those in the know. Who would notice if the flame on the pudding was a little less dramatic this year? You, and perhaps the daring cousin who organized the diversion by shrieking about a mouse under the larder table. It was, after all, for the greater good. You had to make sure the brandy was up to standard. Then there were the subtler forms of sabotage. Swapping the salt for sugar was a classic, the sort of mischief with fallout that rippled through the entire meal. The first hint of disaster came at the vegetables. "Why are the sprouts so festive?" Mother would ask, eyes narrowing at the sweet, slightly alarming aftertaste. Only the most committed saboteur could maintain an innocent expression at that point, especially with siblings smirking behind their napkins. Taste testing was a dangerous but necessary art. There was a window, usually during the chaos of basting, when you could dip a finger into the sauce or carve a sliver off the end of the roast. The risk? Immense. The reward? Even better. If caught, you'd plead hunger or claim you were just making sure the pudding wasn't poisoned. an ancient, time-honored excuse. Quality control is the hallmark of a good hostess, you'd say, in your best impression of Aunt Beatrice. Of course, not all conspiracies were so successful. Sometimes the cook was on high alert, wooden spoon at the ready, more formidable than any governess. Once, you and your accomplices were nearly foiled by a particularly slippery flaw, the scene of a botched gravy rescue and a shattered tureen. You learned to operate in teams, to leave no evidence, and to always have an escape route, preferably through the scullery, where no one dared follow for fear of wet laundry. And yet, for all the scoldings and stern talks in the aftermath, the kitchen conspiracies became the real legends of Christmas. Long after the pudding was eaten, tales of the year the sprouts tasted like pudding or the great brandy vanishing act lived on, told and retold with increasing exaggeration and admiration. It wasn't just about stealing a snack. It was about outsmarting the system, seizing a taste of forbidden fun, and making Christmas your own, even if you had to wash a mountain of pans as penance. Because in a world of strict schedules and endless rules, sometimes the only way to leave your mark was with a well-timed scoop, a little sugar in the wrong bowl, and a kitchen full of accomplices who knew how to keep a secret, at least until the last crumb was gone and the adults were out of earshot. A single sprig of mistletoe is a loaded weapon in Victorian society. Stand under it with the wrong person, and you'll be the talk of the parish until at least Easter. Sometimes you do it just for the drama. There's nothing quite so deceptively innocent as a little green sprig hanging from a ribbon in a doorway. In the Victorian imagination, though, mistletoe was less a bit of festive decor and more a ticking social time bomb. The moment you walked into a room, your eyes would flick up. Is there mistletoe? Who else is in the room? Where are your enemies? Where is your mother, who has the uncanny ability to materialize at the exact moment something even mildly scandalous occurs? Of course, everyone knew the rules. Get caught under the mistletoe, and tradition demanded a kiss, a sweet peck on the cheek perhaps, if you were very young or very lucky. But even a peck could unleash a cascade of whispered gossip that would swirl through the house faster than a draft in the scullery. Was it accidental? Was it on purpose? Was that giggling really just from the younger children, or was there something more to it? You and your girl gang knew the game well. Sometimes, you would maneuver your least favorite cousin beneath the sprig, just as the stuffiest uncle walked in, then feign shock at the resulting commotion. At other times, you'd be the accidental victim, caught just as the local vicar, ancient and beet red, hobbled into the hallway. The mortification was excruciating, and the family would dine out on the story for months, often embellishing the details until you were portrayed as the boldest flirt in 3 counties. But then, sometimes, you'd do it for the thrill. Mistletoe offered a rare opportunity to rebel in broad daylight, a loophole in the otherwise ironclad rules of Victorian decorum. In a world where you weren't supposed to even look at a boy without explicit parental approval, mistletoe made a mockery of the rules. The moment you stood beneath it, you were temporarily untouchable. Any outrage could be blamed on tradition, not intent. Yet the fallout could be seismic. One accidental encounter, and suddenly your name was whispered in every parlor. The next morning at breakfast, Mother's teacup would clink a little louder. Father would clear his throat ominously and avoid eye contact. Sisters would cast sidelong glances, all dying for details. The entire parish, it seemed, would have an opinion, delivered in the form of prayers for your reputation or, worse, subtle advice about the importance of avoiding awkward positions. What they never understood was how much fun it was. Mistletoe mischief was a group project. You and your friends plotting, laughing, and when necessary, covering for each other with wild stories and fake innocence. You'd send your youngest sibling as a scout, Then position yourself strategically in the hope or fear of being caught. The aftermath, though embarrassing, was always worth the thrill. And let's not forget, for every real scandal, there were a dozen imagined ones. Even if nothing happened, just being seen standing too close to the mistletoe could be enough to set tongues wagging. You might not even notice the sprig until the rumors had already spread. So-and-so swore you lingered a little too long in the hallway with that nice boy from next door, and wasn't it suspicious how you both emerged looking a bit flushed? Sometimes, though, the tables turned. The very adults who warned against impropriety would be this first to engineer accidental meetings under the mistletoe, hoping to nudge along a favored match or spark a little holiday romance. Suddenly, the same tradition that got you in trouble was their tool for matchmaking. By 12th night, the mistletoe would be brown and drooping, but the stories would live on, embellished and retold as legend. Maybe your cheeks would burn every time someone mentioned that night. Or maybe you'd wear your notoriety like a badge of honor, because for all the rules and risks, mistletoe missteps were just another way to remind the world that life, especially at Christmas, was a little more interesting with a dash of drama and a lot of laughter. And if you had to spend Easter still living it down, at least you'd never be forgotten. The official version of your letter to Santa is very proper. The real one, hidden in your diary, is more honest. Dear Santa, all I want for Christmas is to not be sent to finishing school. In the Victorian era, writing to Father, Christmas wasn't just a holiday tradition. It was a yearly act of diplomacy, a masterclass in creative self-presentation. The whole household took this ritual seriously. Your mother would stand over your shoulder, gently suggesting perhaps you should mention gratitude for last year's orange, while your father would remind you to avoid overly forward requests or, heaven forbid, any mention of hobbies that sounded remotely unladylike, such as cricket, climbing trees, or competitive pudding eating. The result? A beautifully penned, dull as dishwater letter that could have been written by a minor character in a Dickens novel. You thanked Santa for his continued kindness, asked politely for a new hair ribbon, if it's not too much trouble, and promised, in suspiciously perfect handwriting, to strive to be good and helpful to all. It was the literary equivalent of those Victorian Christmas cards. Proper, pleasant, and carefully devoid of anything resembling your actual personality. But the real letter, the one you scribbled by candlelight and hid beneath the loose floorboard under your bed, was a different matter. This was a letter of confessions, schemes, and barely contained desperation. Dear Santa, please let Aunt Mildred catch the flu and stay in Tunbridge Wells until March. If you must bring coal, could it at least be the kind that doesn't ruin my best petticoat? If you send me a copy of Jane Eyre, I'll promise not to read it out loud at the breakfast table, unless it's the bit where she yells at Mr. Rochester. You poured out your heart and your grievances in ink that blotted and smudged as you wrote. The truth too urgent to wait for proper penmanship. You begged for practical things too, like a way to keep my brothers out of my room, or a lock for my diary. Sometimes you slipped in small bribes. If you could see your way to delivering a whole box of Turkish delight, I'll even eat my vegetables without complaint. More often, you pleaded for absolution. I know I swapped the salt for sugar last year and let the cat eat the fish, but I promise to be good starting next Tuesday. There was a strange relief in writing these secret letters. Here, at least, you could be honest. You could admit that you were tired of needlepoint, that you dreamed of adventure, and that, on occasion, you envied boys for their freedom to get muddy and break windows without being sentenced to 3 days of silent reflection. In the privacy of your diary, you and Santa had an understanding. He got the proper letter for public consumption, but the real wish list, the one that mattered, was smuggled out in a haze of candle smoke and rebellious hope. Every so often, you'd tuck a scrap of your secret letter into your stocking, just in case there was any magic in the air. The idea that Father Christmas, mysterious and all-seeing, might prefer honesty to propriety was comforting. Even if the odds of him reading your contraband requests were slim, you started to suspect that Santa himself would approve of a girl who told the truth, even when the truth was, please, no more socks. The best part, though, was comparing notes with your fellow conspirators. On a cold night, huddled in the linen closet, you'd read excerpts from each other's real letters and laugh until you cried. The wishes were sometimes wild. A lifetime supply of marzipan, a dog that eats Brussels sprouts, and sometimes achingly real. All I want is to be allowed to decide who I marry, or let me stay a child for just one more Christmas. In the end, those secret letters were more than a list. They were a lifeline, a way to shout your wishes into the universe and imagine that someone, somewhere, was listening, even if the only one who ever read them was you, and maybe a very understanding mouse. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real magic of Christmas. Not the gifts in the stocking, but the truth in the letter. Honest and hopeful and just a little bit naughty. When the parlor games get heated, all bets are off. You may have peeked at the charades clue, you may have rigged the blind man's bluff. Who's to say? In Victorian England, even innocent fun is suspect. No Victorian Christmas was complete without a raucous round of parlour games, those strange and wonderful amusements designed to keep everyone occupied when it was too cold or too scandalous to go outside. In theory, these games were the model of wholesome entertainment. Charades, blind man's bluff, snapdragon, and the ever-popular hunt the slipper. In practice, they were a test of nerves, wits, and, for the naughtier contingent, an opportunity for subtle sabotage. You learned early that the rules of parlour games were made to be tested. The grown-ups, with their long memories and longer faces, insisted on playing everything by the book, but the children, especially the clever ones, knew all the loopholes. Charades, for instance, was only as fair as the honesty of the person drawing the slips, and who could resist a little strategic peeking when no one was looking? All's fair in love and parlour games. Blind man's bluff, meanwhile, was practically an invitation to mischief. Blindfolded and spun in circles, you groped around the parlour while your cousins giggled and tiptoed just out of reach. But not everyone played by the spirit of the game. Some tied the blindfold a little loose. Others whispered directions to their favourite sibling, and one legendary cousin once tied the dog's tail to the piano leg, so you'd trip over it every single time. That particular round ended in chaos, a broken teacup, and a lecture on sportsmanship. Then there were the games of chance. Snapdragon, a dangerous blend of raisins and brandy set aflame in a dish, was less a test of skill and more a fire hazard in fancy dress. The bravest, or most reckless, reached into the blue flames to snatch a raisin and gobble it down before their eyebrows met the same fate. The grown-ups claimed it was all in good fun, but you suspected they secretly enjoyed watching the children's faces go pale with fear and delight. Hunt the slipper and consequences, on the other hand, provided ample opportunity for subtle rule-bending. You'd hide the slipper somewhere ingenious, in the coal scuttle, behind the sofa, inside the Christmas goose, then hint just enough to help your chosen accomplice win. Consequences, a game where everyone writes down part of a story, then folds the paper and passes it on, was a way to slip in a cheeky remark or two, all safely anonymous until the grand reading, when Mother's eyebrows would shoot skyward at your contribution. The vicar met the goose in the library, and they both ran away to Brighton. Of course, the risk of being caught was half the fun. There was a particular thrill in feigning innocence while the adults looked on, half convinced you were up to something, but never quite able to pin down the crime. The family patriarch would mutter about the decline of honest play, but even he had to admit that the games were never more exciting than when someone, usually you, found a way to keep things interesting. Cheating at parlor games wasn't really about winning. It was about turning a long evening of forced togetherness into a contest of creativity and cunning. The best cheats were collaborative. One sister distracting the grown-ups while another swapped the clues, or cousins passing secret signals across the table. And the losers? Even they got in on the act, plotting revenge for next time. Always in the spirit of the season, by the end of the night, the parlor was a mess of overturned chairs, scattered cards, and the lingering scent of singed raisins. You might be scolded, or, if you were lucky, merely warned about setting a bad example. But as everyone drifted off to bed, you knew the true victory was in the laughter, the plotting, and the knowledge that, in a world of endless rules, you'd managed, just for a while, to turn Christmas into your own game. So, when the next round of charades begins, and the grown-ups solemnly shuffle the clues, just remember, in the great tradition of Victorian naughtiness, all bets are off, and may the best cheat win. For every act of mischief, there's a punishment, ranging from extra lessons in needlework to being forced to read aloud from Pilgrim's Progress, while everyone else enjoys the fun. Victorian justice for naughty girls was swift, certain, and almost always designed to feel like the end of the world, at least until tea time. There was no such thing as a simple sorry and a second chance. Every crime, whether it was pinching a mince pie, orchestrating a snowball ambush, or hiding the family's best candied orange peel, was met with a punishment perfectly calculated to drain the joy from your holiday spirit. Let's start with the classic extra needlework. The moment you heard, "You'll spend the afternoon with your sampler," you knew your Christmas had taken a tragic turn. There's only so much cross-stitching of a stitch in time saves 9 a human spirit can endure. While your siblings cavorted in the snow or plotted their next pudding heist, you'd be perched at the window, hands cramping, eyes watering, every mistake. A reminder that a life of vice leads to crooked letters and endless hours of mending socks. And then there was the dreaded public reading. Nothing made you regret your actions more than being forced to stand by the hearth and recite passages from Pilgrim's Progress, or, worse, moral tales for young ladies, while your friends and relations feasted and giggled in the next room. The Victorians believed that a healthy dose of allegory could cure any tendency toward trouble, but you mostly learned how to project your voice over the sound of muffled laughter and clinking dessert spoons. Some punishments were more creative and more cruel. Sent to bed early, you'd lie awake, listening to the echoes of a parlor game or the strains of God Rest Ye Merry, Gentlemen drifting up the stairs. Your mind would replay the night's adventures, now tinged with the bitter knowledge that you were missing out on hot punch and maybe, if you were really unlucky, the unveiling of the flaming pudding. This was no ordinary timeout. This was social exile, Victorian style, and it left a mark deeper than any lecture ever could. Occasionally, you'd be assigned a chore for reflection, fetching coal from the icy shed, polishing the family silver until your arms ached, or untangling a basket of hopelessly knotted ribbons. These chores, while dull, provided ample time for plotting your next escapade. You'd emerge from punishment with a renewed sense of purpose and a few fresh ideas for outsmarting the adults next time. There were group penalties, too, which Victorians wielded with Machiavellian glee. If one girl was caught misbehaving, sometimes all the girls were rounded up for collective penance. The theory was that peer pressure would stamp out mischief. In reality, it built an even stronger sense of solidarity. You'd exchange secret smiles as you polished candlesticks side by side, united by the injustice of it all. But the most terrifying threat was the looming spectre of finishing school. This wasn't so much a punishment as a life sentence, a place where naughtiness was wrung out of you along with any sense of humor. Adults would whisper the words with grave faces. If this behavior continues, we'll have no choice. The implication was clear. Your fate hung in the balance, dependent on your ability to keep your petticoats clean and your laughter subdued. Yet, for all the consequences, you and your partners in crime rarely stayed penitent for long. You knew that even the most fearsome punishment would fade, while the memory of your mischief would live on. Besides, you'd perfected the art of looking contrite while secretly passing coded notes, planning your next move. There was something almost exhilarating in pushing boundaries and surviving the aftermath, in knowing you'd risked a little and gotten away with a lot. So you stitched, recited, and polished, enduring every Victorian timeout with as much grace as you could muster. But you also knew the truth. Every punishment was just another story to share, another badge of honor among the naughty girls who made Christmas memorable, not for their obedience, but for their spirit. And as soon as the coast was clear, you'd be right back at it, leading the charge for fun, laughter, and a little well-earned trouble. After a few Christmases on the naughty list, you've developed a set of essential survival skills: how to sneak out without a creak, how to hide evidence, how to look innocent while plotting your next move. Survival in the world of Victorian Christmas wasn't just about keeping your ankles warm or your petticoats clean. It was about outsmarting a system designed to catch even the faintest whiff of mischief. By now, you're less a simple schoolgirl and more a seasoned undercover agent, trained in the subtle arts of deflection, deception, and, on occasion, escape and evasion. Let's start with reconnaissance. Step 1. Know your house. Every floorboard has its own particular groan, every doorknob a specific rattle. You could draw a map of the house, blindfolded, complete with noisy zones, safe passageways, and potential hiding places for illicit sweets, novels, or the family cat, should it accidentally get wrapped up in your latest scheme. The true expert learns to walk on the balls of her feet, skirting rug edges and treading only on the boards that have proven, year after year, to be blessedly silent. Next, the art of concealment. After your first run-in with Aunt Beatrice's inspection hour, you developed a sixth sense for hiding evidence. Smuggled treats belong behind the loose brick in the fireplace or in the toe of your oldest boot, well rinsed for flavor. Books forbidden by the family's reading list slip nicely behind the third row of Dickens, where no adult has ventured since the year of the Great Mouse Incident. If questioned, maintain innocence. Practice the wide-eyed stare, the slow blink, and the innocent shrug. For advanced practitioners, the double bluff, "Why would I ever hide Jane Eyre? I'm far too busy with moral tales for young ladies," is essential. Communication with allies is crucial. Sisters, cousins, and the occasional sympathetic maid form your network. Develop a code. Innocuous phrases like "the snow is especially crunchy tonight" translate to "meet in the pantry at midnight." For more urgent situations, you've established signals. 2 knocks means danger. 3 knocks means bring the biscuits. If a parent or nosy brother is closing in, deploy the emergency decoy. An overly dramatic reading from Pilgrim's Progress can buy you just enough time to hide the stolen brandy snaps. Never underestimate the power of plausible deniability. When caught in the middle of a caper, insist you were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I was just looking for my thimble works for the kitchen, the pantry, and even the broom closet." If something explodes, breaks, or mysteriously vanishes, look just as shocked as everyone else. Remember, the goal is to cast doubt, not to lie outright. If your little brother has a guilty look about him, Feel free to let suspicion drift in his direction. He probably deserves it. Timing is everything. The best escapades take place during moments of maximum adult distraction, just after supper, during Aunt Mildred's lengthy reminiscences, or when the parlor clock is being wound, an event so dull it could hide a parade of elephants. Be alert for shifting the guard moments. Servants changing shifts. Siblings in the bath. Father dozing off with the newspaper. Those precious minutes are your window for midnight feasts. Prank setup, or a quick turn in the snow before the official no outdoor play decree is issued. And finally, cultivate your good girl reputation, at least part-time. A well-placed compliment here, a neatly stitched sampler there, and the occasional display of model behavior buys you precious trust. The less adults suspect, the freer your hands for the real fun. If you do get caught, and let's face it, you will, a sincere apology and a slightly quivering lip can sometimes reduce your sentence from solitary confinement in your room, with only the cat for company, to a mere hour of dusting. At the end of the day, the true naughty girl's survival guide isn't just about outwitting your elders. It's about camaraderie, cunning, and the endless pursuit of a little extra adventure. Because in the strict world of Victorian Christmas, being clever enough to stay one step ahead is the greatest present of all. As the year turns, you're expected to repent and resolve to be better. You consider it, briefly. But honestly, what's the fun in that? Victorian Christmas may have come and gone in a blur of pudding, pranks, and a well-earned lump of coal. But the new year arrives with its own special set of expectations. Every adult in the house seems to believe that January is a blank slate, an opportunity for moral improvement, and, most ominously, a time for children to reflect on their shortcomings and make heartfelt resolutions. This year, your mother intones at breakfast, "Let's all strive to be kinder, more patient, and a little less mischievous." Eyes turn to you, the family's reigning champion of holiday havoc. You know the drill. After the last crumbs of mince pie have been swept away and the decorations packed up, the family gathers in the parlor for the annual ritual. New Year's resolutions. Everyone is expected to offer up a promise of betterment, delivered with all the sincerity a 12-year-old can muster. Your brother vows to help with chores. He won't. Your sister promises not to tease the cat. She will. Your cousin declares she'll never sneak into the pantry again, unlikely, as she is already hiding a biscuit up her sleeve. When your turn comes, you weigh your options. Should you resolve to obey, to smile politely, to never again substitute currants for pepper in the Christmas pudding? For a fleeting moment, you picture yourself as the model Victorian girl, calm, compliant, and, let's be honest, spectacularly boring. Then you remember the joy of that midnight snowball fight, the triumph of smuggling extra tarts, the thrill of surviving another year's worth of punishments with your sense of humor, mostly intact. Because let's face it, the real tradition isn't in changing your ways, but in finding smarter, sneakier ways to get away with them. Maybe you resolve not to get caught. Maybe you promise to be slightly more subtle with your mischief, to refine your pranks to the point where even Father Christmas himself would be impressed. You decide, privately, to keep your resolutions ambiguous. "I resolve to try new things," you announce, which everyone takes as a sign of your maturing spirit. Only your fellow conspirators know it really means try new tricks. There's something delightfully subversive about the whole affair. The adults, convinced they are molding future saints, have no idea that the real lesson of Christmas is camaraderie, creativity, and the unbreakable bond of a well-run prank squad. Your best memories, the ones you'll carry long after your sampler skills are forgotten, are born of rule-bending, laughter, and the quiet solidarity of naughty girls everywhere. And really, who ever heard of a New Year's resolution that actually lasted? By 12th night, the household is back to its old routines. The cook guards the pantry with renewed vigilance. The parlor games are just as competitive and crooked as ever, and you're already plotting the next great kitchen caper. The grown-ups sigh, but you catch them smiling too. Deep down, even they must admit that life would be dreadfully dull without a little harmless rebellion. Besides, the calendar may have flipped, but you haven't. You're still the heroine of your own story. Whether that means redemption, repeat offense, or some artful combination of both. Maybe this is the year you'll break fewer rules. Maybe not. But if there's one promise you can make with your whole heart, it's this. Whatever happens, you'll make it memorable. So as the frost glitters outside and the new year beckons, you raise a toast, ginger beer, naturally, to the future. Here's to another year of clever escapes, secret snacks, near misses, and, most importantly, the determination to keep things interesting. Because being a little bit naughty is not just a tradition, it's a legacy, and you're proud to carry it into every new year. Resolution or not, as the fire dies and the house settles, you drift off in your freezing, overstuffed bed, comforted by the knowledge that even in the strictest age, someone, somewhere, was always breaking the rules, just enough to make history a little more interesting. Victorian Christmas is over, and the house is quieter than it's been in days. The faint glow from the embers casts tall, wobbly shadows across the wall, making even the familiar shape of the dresser look like it might spring to life and demand to see your hands, just in case you're hiding a stolen tart. You wriggle beneath your mountain of blankets and petticoats. The only warm spots those where you've managed to tuck your toes under the hot brick someone remembered to slip into your bed. Your cheeks still sting from the cold, and your mind hums with the memories of every act of holiday defiance, every giggle stifled behind mittened hands. There's a unique kind of peace in the darkness, a knowing peace that comes not from perfection, but from surviving. The day might have been packed with scoldings, needlework, and the endless threat of moral improvement, but now, as the last lamp is snuffed, you're free to reflect on the glorious, messy truth. You made it through, not just with your manners mostly intact, but with your spirit unbroken and your story a little richer for every rebellious moment. You think of the secret meetings in linen closets and the taste of forbidden jam. You remember the thrill of sneaking out into the yard with your conspirators, the shock of snow up your sleeves, the bruised knees from one sled race too many. You grin to yourself, recalling how a well-timed cracker explosion or a suspiciously sweet Brussels sprout can turn an ordinary dinner into the stuff of legend. It's almost funny how, in a world that worked so hard to enforce obedience, the most lasting memories are the ones built on mischief. Lulled by the quiet, you find yourself drifting between pride and drowsy amusement. Did you learn your lesson? Perhaps at least the lesson that life is too short for endless apologies, and that a good story is always worth a mild telling off. Maybe, you think, the adults even know this. Maybe your mother's sighs and your father's lectures are just their way of joining the performance, keeping the game alive. After all, every tale of the year the pudding went missing, or the infamous mistletoe mishap is told a little brighter with each passing winter. Outside, the wind howls through the hedges and rattles the window panes. But you're safe in your small, self-made fortress of warmth, memory, and just a hint of smug satisfaction. Your fellow rule-breakers sleep nearby, equally exhausted, equally triumphant, across the generations, across the centuries. You're connected to every other child who ever bent the rules, from the kitchens of Dickensian London to the grandest halls of the Queen herself. If you listen hard, you can almost hear the distant echo of laughter, someone else, somewhere else, risking a scolding for one last joke or a midnight snack. It's a comforting thought, knowing that the tradition of small rebellion isn't just yours. It's woven into history, a quiet resistance that keeps the world interesting, keeps the spirit alive. As you surrender to sleep, your last thoughts are soft and sweet. That the best part of Christmas wasn't in the stockings or the gifts, but in the secret joys, the whispered plans, and the irrepressible, indomitable urge to live just a little bit on the wild side. The fire may be out, but the glow of mischief lingers on. Good night, and dream daringly, because tomorrow is another day, and even the best-behaved girl knows rules were made to be tested, especially at Christmas. Trimming the Victorian Christmas tree is a high-stakes game. One wrong move, and you've shattered great-grandmama's priceless glass bauble, a family heirloom brought over from the continent. As everyone gasps in horror, you're left balancing a broken ornament and your own shaky alibi. It was the cat, there is no cat. Decorating the Pyam's Christmas tree in a proper Victorian household is a spectacle in itself, filled with as much suspense as a penny, dreadful and about as many rules as a parliamentary debate. Each ornament has a backstory, and each branch is a territory fiercely guarded by older siblings and eagle-eyed aunts. The pressure is immense. One slip, and you risk not just a family crisis, but an incident worthy of multi-generational retelling. No pressure. You know the drill. Grown-ups hover, clutching fragile glass birds, silver bells, and mysterious objects that look as if they belong in a cabinet of curiosities. Your job? Stand by. Look eager, and, when summoned, place a single paper angel exactly where instructed, without breathing too hard or thinking about running for the door. For the younger children, the safe ornaments are reserved, usually wooden apples or gingerbread men that can survive a tumble. You, however, have graduated to handling the decorations, which is either a privilege or a trap, depending on your luck and the sturdiness of your nerves. Every so often, someone makes the mistake of improvising. Perhaps you feel daring and reach for the silver icicle, only to fumble it at the last moment. Maybe you decide the tree's left side needs more color, and shift the precious blue glass peacock from its ancestral perch. Or, emboldened by a moment of holiday spirit, and possibly a stolen sip of sherry from the grown-up's punch, you attempt to balance 3 ornaments on a single branch, certain it will become a new family tradition. It never ends well. The sound of shattering glass rings out like a church bell announcing your doom. In an instant, all conversation ceases. The temperature in the room drops as every adult fixes you with the sort of look usually reserved for criminal masterminds and unfortunate pastry disasters. You freeze, ornament shards in hand, heart pounding as you scramble for a plausible story. It was the cat seems reasonable, until you remember, with horror, that the last family cat died in 1847. Panic sets in. You could try blaming a draft, or perhaps suggest the ornament was already cracked. Anything but admit you were daydreaming about sneaking a marzipan pig from the sideboard. Meanwhile, your siblings leap into action, some eager to implicate you. They haven't forgotten last year's pinecone avalanche incident. Others silently grateful it wasn't their turn in the hot seat. An aunt swoops in, inspecting the carnage and muttering about continental craftsmanship and the decline of proper training. The punishment is swift. You're relegated to the garland detail, forced to loop faded paper chains, while someone else handles the delicate work. But even in disgrace, there's a certain freedom. No one pays much attention to garlands, and you can scheme with fellow outcasts about next year's tree improvement plan, perhaps an upside-down tree or a secret compartment for emergency suites. And yet, for all, the drama, the ornament debacle becomes a family favorite. By evening, the story has already grown in the telling. The ornament was priceless, the bauble the size of your head, the shattering a sound heard for miles. You survive on quick wits, a bit of contrition, and the knowledge that, in the grand scheme of things, a broken ornament is just another chapter in the Christmas saga of mischief and mayhem. Later, as the tree sparkles in candlelight, slightly lopsided but bursting with personality, you realize that imperfection is what makes the moment memorable. The adults may sigh, but deep down, everyone loves a good story, especially if it ends with laughter and a sticky handful of stolen marzipan. Because Christmas trees, like families, are never truly perfect. And sometimes, the best ornaments are the ones with a little history and a lot of character behind the cracks. Wassail was meant to warm the soul, but in your hands, it's more like a tactical beverage bomb. 1. Enthusiastic toast. And now Aunt Lavinia is wearing the punch bowl, the rug is forever sticky, and the family has a new Christmas story, starring you, the wassail wrecker. The thing about wassail is that it's the Victorian answer to modern eggnog. Spicy, strong, and best handled with caution by those with steady hands and impeccable coordination. Sadly, you possess neither. From the moment the punch bowl is hauled onto the parlor table, its steaming, aromatic brew swirling with floating apples and citrus, you know the danger level has officially entered the red zone. The grown-ups, always hopeful, offer helpful reminders. Carry it with 2 hands, dear. Or do mind your sleeves this time. Meanwhile, you're already calculating the odds of disaster as the queue for refills snakes out of the room. The first cup is always a test. You try to balance plate, glass, and spoon, all while navigating a maze of siblings and decorative footstools that seem expressly designed to trip you up. Aunt Lavinia herself stands at the center of the room, a vision of lace and social status, just begging to be doused in hot cider. You take a cautious sip, and for a fleeting moment, you think you might actually survive this year's wassail gauntlet with dignity intact. Then come the toasts. Oh, the toasts. Victorians loved nothing more than raising their glasses to every conceivable subject. To Christmas cheer, someone cries. To absent friends, says another. To the new carpet, shouts a voice from the corner, which in hindsight seems almost like foreshadowing. Caught up in the festive spirit, and perhaps a little tipsy on sugar and spice, you raise your own glass with gusto. In one swoop, your elbow clips the edge of the punch bowl, sending a tidal wave of wassail across the table. Apples bob overboard. A lemon wedge ricochets off the centerpiece. Aunt Lavinia gasps as a cascade of warm cider descends upon her finest silk gown. For a brief, silent moment, the room holds its breath. Then, chaos erupts. Cousins scatter, servants scramble for towels, and your mother covers her face with one gloved hand, muttering, "Not again." You, meanwhile, are frozen in the epicenter, dripping ladle in hand, praying for the earth to open up beneath you or, failing that, for the punch bowl to spontaneously refill itself and undo the last 60 seconds of your life. The aftermath is as sticky as the rug. Aunt Lavinia, ever the martyr, dabs delicately at her sleeves while explaining to anyone within earshot that this simply wouldn't have happened in her day. The grown-ups debate whether to salvage the punch or write it off as a total loss. The children, naturally, are delighted. Any event that leaves the parlor in chaos and an adult wearing more of the Christmas menu than they consume is cause for celebration and inspiration for years to come. Your siblings waste no time in embellishing the tale. By the next morning, it's rumored you launched the wassail like a cannonball, that the punch bowl exploded, and that Aunt Lavinia fainted on the spot. She did not, but you suspect she rather enjoys the attention. The rug, once a proud display of Victorian floral design, now bears the faint, sticky outline of your signature move. Of course, the lecture arrives. Be more careful. Think before you act, the value of a steady hand. But even as you nod, you're secretly pleased. The tale of the wassail wrecker joins the ranks of family legend, retold every December with more laughter than reproach. As you scrub the last of the cider from the floor, you realize there's a peculiar magic in these moments, the messy, unpredictable, deliciously human side of Christmas. And long after the carpet is cleaned and Aunt Lavinia's dress replaced, everyone will remember this year's wassail and the girl who made it unforgettable. And so, as the last embers fade in the grate and the house grows quiet, you, our gloriously naughty Victorian heroine, have survived another Christmas, coal in your stocking, crumbs in your bed, and at least 3 minor scandals under your belt. You've outwitted the etiquette police, dodged punishment, mostly, and left your mark on the holly-trimmed halls of family history, one cheeky prank at a time. Reflect for a moment on what you've endured. Petticoats wielded like instruments of oppression, endless scoldings from relatives who've never smiled, and the eternal struggle of resisting the forbidden call of the pudding. You braved the judgy breakfast table, sabotaged sprouts, rewrote carols with questionable lyrics, and made Christmas just a little more interesting for everyone, whether they wanted it or not. Maybe tonight, as you sink into your modern memory foam mattress, one that, blessedly, does not contain old straw, live mice, or the memory of spilled wassail, you'll feel a small surge of gratitude for central heating, indoor plumbing, and the fact that Santa is much less judgmental these days. History